headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I'm Carla Gonzalez. This is From the South. We begin in Venezuela, where thousands of people have come together at PDVSA's headquarters to reject the new U.S. sanctions. Workers say the country will come together with courage and moral strength to defend the state-owned oil company and its U.S.-based refinery, Citgo. The president of the National Constituent Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, addressed the gathering and rejected the actions, also of the European Union.
They'll send planes. They will drop bombs and kill people. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to them at all. Today they could fly over in a plane and drop a bomb over here where we are. And for what reason? Because we are Chavista. When the United States decides to bomb, they make victims of children, hospitals, schools. They stop at absolutely nothing. I ask for people to be conscious. Those Venezuelans who are asking for an intervention against our nation, those who are asking for military intervention, at the time of an intervention, they will be regarded as an enemy of the nation.
And Venezuela's interior minister has just announced several arrests connected to recent violent acts in the country. Néstor Reverol says authorities have arrested a number of mercenaries and terrorists. He says they also seized weapons and materials that were going to be used to assassinate President Nicolás Maduro.
We, led by the President Nicolás Maduro Moros, will continue exercising in a democratic manner the legitimate authority according to the Constitution and the laws of the Republic in order to continue building the path to peace.
Venezuelan authorities have rejected the recent actions by the European Parliament. EU lawmakers have recognized opposition leader Juan Guaidó as the interim leader of the country. The vote was 429 in favor to 104 against. The Parliament is now urging all EU governments to follow suit. And members of the EU's Izquierda Unida rejected the resolution in full force.
The European left have voted against the resolution on Venezuela presented by Partido Popular, Social Democrats and Liberals. Of course, because it's a resolution which recognizes Juan Guaidó, the coup plotter, as president. And it does so because, as we all know, the European Union is super preoccupied with human rights. And that's why it finances torture centers for migrants in Libya. They build barbed wire fences, and now they're preventing NGO boats from going out to rescue people.
I voted against the resolution on the situation in Venezuela because, unfortunately, once again, we find ourselves with a European Union which crosses the red line of respect for international rights. Today, the European Union subordinates once again to the United States, and it puts itself on the side of the pro-war bloc, where you find Duque, Bolsonaro, who are preparing a grand coup and a military intervention.
Mexico and Uruguay have announced that they will jointly host an international conference to advocate for dialogue in Venezuela. This conference will be held in Uruguay's capital, Montevideo, on February 7th. Representatives of countries and international organizations with a neutral position on Venezuela will also join. The president of the Mercosur has also called for a meeting with member states to be held after the conference. He described this move as a very important initiative in support of dialogue in Venezuela. And Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador recalled that during the French intervention, a foreign power tried to impose a new government in Mexico. He said that was the basis of his non-intervention policy.
We, for geopolitical reasons, maintain these principles because we don't want foreign governments to intervene in matters that only involve Mexicans. And that's why we have to be very careful not to intervene in the internal matters of other countries, so that other governments, other countries, don't intervene in our internal policies. That is part of Mexico's traditional policy.
Where peaceful scenes of Caracas being seen across the streets of Caracas unraveled the plans of those on social media who are hoping to show Venezuela as a country in chaos. A correspondent in Caracas, Luis Tavera, tells us what the people in the streets think of the media war.
Popular support is still evident in the streets even when facing a situation hoping to bring down Venezuelan democracy. The people are against the Venezuelan coup d'etat in their country.
International community, listen to us. We choose our president, Nicolás Maduro.
Social inclusion is another achievement that grandparents will continue defending.
As you can imagine, people are in streets defending Nicolás.
On the other side of the city, the opposition held protests for 2 hours despite low attendance. Everything was calm, with all the democratic guarantees that protect freedom of expression. Meanwhile, the revolutionary forces showed their strength and said that certain sectors of the opposition are playing with Venezuelan sovereignty.
They have evidence agreements with international business. They have supported the proclamation of an illegitimate president, usurping the post of president for which Maduro was elected. He has been chosen for 6 years, and he was elected by the people following the death of Comandante Hugo Chavez.
Venezuela will continue on the path of peace and confirm that there are clear constitutional means to preserve the country's sovereignty. They don't want interference.
The Canadian Labour Congress, representing over 3 million workers, has called on the government to promote dialogue in Venezuela. The labor movement said it was alarmed at the escalation of international interference in Venezuela. It also rejected a militarized solution to this crisis. Justin Trudeau's administration in Canada is among some of the governments that have endorsed Venezuela's opposition leader. In Brazil, today marks 300 days of imprisonment for the former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Lula supporters gather around the detention center where he's being held in Curitiba. Lula's Workers' Party says that he has been the victim of political persecution and convicted without evidence. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court granted permission for Lula to attend his brother's funeral, but it was too late. His sibling had already been buried. Let's look back at why Lula was in prison. Our correspondent Brian Meir has the details.
January 31st marks 300 days since former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was arrested and thrown into solitary confinement in the federal police headquarters in Curitiba as a political prisoner. Lula was condemned by a local judge named Sergio Moro, who was working in a joint corruption investigation with the American Department of Justice called Operation Car Wash. Nevertheless, after years of investigation, they couldn't find any material evidence implicating Lula in any crime. Therefore, he was judged and ruled as having committed undetermined acts of corruption. Since then, he's been held in solitary confinement. He's had many of the rights denied to him that are available for regular prisoners in Brazil, which just strengthens the argument that he's a political prisoner. For example, on the 29th of January, his older brother, Vavá, passed away. And on the 30th, he was denied the right to go to his own brother's funeral. Now, this is a right that's commonly granted in Brazil. The last year that statistics are available on this is 2015. That year, 175,000 Brazilian prisoners were allowed to go to the funerals of loved ones or relatives. But this right was denied to Lula in one more abomination of justice against the most popular president that Brazil has ever had.
From Brazil, our correspondent Brian Meir. We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Me gustaría tener un mundo mucho más inclusivo para todos.
没有贫穷.
Στην ανθρωπότητα θα ήθελα να δω παραπάνω αγάπη, αγνότητα, πολιτισμό και επαφή με τη φύση.
Que el ser humano despierte su conciencia.
I want humanity to see itself as one humanity.
We are the people, a space, a voice. We are Telesur without borders.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. El Salvador's presidential election will be held on Sunday. Telesur's Jorge Gestoso sat down with the FMLN candidate Hugo Martinez and asked him about how he will fight poverty.
Es multicausal, ¿verdad?
Poverty has several causes. It's a problem we've been dealing with for our entire history, and it has to do with the way that wealth was built here. And every time there's a corruption problem, a group of people evades paying taxes, and that directly affects our capacity to lift people out of poverty, especially in a country with such limited resources. In El Salvador, the cost of tax evasion equals a third of the national budget, about $1.9 million each year. And that will be a key issue, to recover that money, to invest in social programs, for more social justice.
Martinez also said that if he becomes the president of El Salvador, he will work towards peaceful solutions to conflicts in other countries, not impose his own.
We've been talking about the situation in Venezuela, and I will present it in another way. I'll look to be a facilitator, as I've done previously in other countries. I want to be a person who helps resolve problems between us because we are brothers, respecting the sovereignty and integrity of each country's territory. These issues could be happening in any country. In this case, it's Venezuela, but we've had difficult situations in other nations. I'll be proactive and help out, respecting the law.
Now to Ecuador, women, students, workers, and indigenous organizations took to the streets of the capital to protest against the economic policies of President Lenín Moreno. Protesters in Quito opposed rising fuel prices, privatization of public companies, talks with the International Monetary Fund, and growing violence against women. Those on the march demanded that the government issued debt forgiveness to state companies in order to halt the privatization of the public sector.
We have called together students, workers and professionals to protest against all the measures the government is trying to force on us, starting from tax remission to the economic announcements made last December, including the proposals to privatize some public companies.
We're marching against the privatization of public companies, especially the public telecommunications company CNT. We are also marching against the rising cost of living and the elimination of fuel subsidies. When the government of Lenín Moreno took office, they said they would work for the poor. But governing for the poor should mean avoiding corruption and not giving away the CNT to privatization.
We had a correspondent, Elise Herrera, at the march, and she sent us this report.
Thousands of people are taking to the streets today against the latest economic measures announced by the government of Lenín Moreno. Today, several organizations of women, indigenous people, workers and students are here today protesting against the latest measures announced by the government. We should remember that recently the economy minister announced new talks between the IMF and Ecuador. But today we are talking with one of the members of this organization who will share with us what are demanding today.
We are against the economic measures of Lenin Moreno. We know that gas prices will rise without question. This will affect our parents, our pockets, young people, students. We are also against the violence we've seen targeting women. We're against the violence of capitalism, patriarchy, and xenophobia, and we're calling for free entry into university.
Thank you very much. This is one of the testimonies here marching against the latest measures announced by the government of Lenin Moreno. They are demanding and asking to the government to take actions that benefits all these sectors here in Ecuador.
Denise Herrera from Quito. And also in Ecuador, the country will accept financing from the International Monetary Fund. But economists warn that austerity measures could do more harm than good. Denise Herrera went to find out what effect the IMF measures could have on everyday citizens.
Ecuador's finance minister, Richard Martinez, was part of a delegation headed by President Moreno, who recently attended the World Economic Forum in Davos, which ended on January 25th. He says during that event, prospects for Ecuador's economic outlook were discussed with representatives from multilateral financial institutions.
The meetings with these organizations were productive. We met with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank and with the directors of the International Monetary Fund. In both instances, we proposed technical cooperation. In the case of the IDB, we review financing for this year and for the future. Government will ensure that the country does stand to the benefit from these multilateral lending agencies.
The finance minister has also revealed that recent talks between Ecuador's president and the IMF managing director were also fruitful. That meeting also took place within the framework of the World Economic Forum in Davos. The finance minister was part of that delegation. Minister Martinez says that it was during those discussions with the Washington-based institution that Ecuador's government opened its doors to the IMF as the country seeks to reduce the fiscal deficit and the international debt.
Over the next few months, it is expected that the IMF, as part of its work agenda, will facilitate productive cooperation between the Ecuadorian authorities and the fund's technical staff.
Although Minister Martinez says Ecuador is seeking to generate different sources of financing, the minister will not say which financial institutions the government is looking to. Economists, while any deal struck with the IMF would offer Ecuador new financing alternatives, they warn citizens to brace for many challenges ahead.
A program of this nature will bring worsening recession through economic contraction. This means there will be hard-hitting structural adjustment measures. What the Ecuadorian people must do is demand transparency from the government and call on the government to state clearly the pros and cons of any deal with the IMF and its impact on the people.
Minister Martinez boasts that the IMF applauded Ecuador's recent reduction of its fiscal deficit. It was lowered from 6% GDP at the start of the 2018 to 3.3% of GDP by the end of the year. This was accomplished by reductions in public spending and a revision of gas subsidies. However, the latest opinion poll showed that 75% of Ecuadorians think that Moreno-led administration is bad. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Now to Chile, where 6 former agents of the dictatorship have been condemned for the assassination of the former president Eduardo Frei Montalva in 1982. They have been sentenced to prison with terms from 3 to 10 years. This is the first sentence handed down in Chile for the murder of a former head of state. Frei Montalva was poisoned by Augusto Pinochet's agents after he went into surgery. Indigenous authorities in Guatemala have warned President Jimmy Morales not to interfere in the upcoming general election in June. This as a political crisis follows the confrontation between his government and the UN Anti-Corruption Commission.
Leaders of different indigenous communities in Guatemala say that the mounting political crisis over President Morales' decision to expel the UNBAC Commission against impunity could hinder the upcoming general elections.
We are calling on the Supreme Electoral Court to assert its autonomy and ensure that the elections won't be impeded by what's happening right now.
The court has called for general elections on June 16th. Meanwhile, the government of Jimmy Morales has forced the International Commission against impunity out of the country. The commission has previously worked closely with the Electoral Court to prevent illicit electoral financing. Indigenous authorities fear that this will allow President Morales to guarantee impunity for certain candidates, donors, and political parties.
They are trying to stop investigations from going deeper into corruption cases and bringing concerns to light as soon as possible. What they are doing is distracting Guatemalans from corruption and preventing them from understanding what harm they do to society.
Jimmy Morales has managed to avoid facing justice for alleged illicit electoral financing, but 2 requests for preliminary hearings have been filed, one by former Attorney General Del Maldana, who is also a candidate for the presidency.
We know very well that their intention is to hinder general elections in 2019.
The upcoming general elections are marked by the current political crisis emerging from the strained relationship between President Morales and the Anti-Corruption Commission. The scenario has an uncanny similarity to the presidential elections in 2015, when President Otto Pérez Molina resigned over corruption accusations.
Officials in Mexico City said that a recently launched firearms amnesty project is a success. The initiative allows residents to hand in weapons anonymously in a bid to curb gun-related violence in the capital city. During the week-long event, more weapons were handed in than throughout 2018. That includes a total of 444 firearms and grenades.
I came because I have my husband's weapon. He was a police agent and left his weapon. Then it represents a great risk because I have a daughter and my husband died 15 years ago. I'm handing it in because it serves no purpose to have that weapon. And apart from that, they also give you something.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The death toll after 2 migrant boats sank off the coast of Djibouti has risen to 52. 16 people were rescued following the sinkings, and one survivor told authorities that there were 130 people on his boat alone. Rescue teams are still searching for the missing. On Thursday, the UN Migration Agency appealed to regional leaders to take action to stop such tragedies.
So, our coast guards found dead bodies of 52 migrants, and death toll may go up, and the operations are still ongoing.
I moved from Tajura by foot to Obak, where I met with the trafficker. He took us to the coast side, where we boarded a boat. There were 85 of us migrants on that single boat. A few minutes after sailing from the coast, the sailor jumped from the boat after an engine failure. then it capsized.
On Wednesday, the head of the UN mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo provided an update on the intercommunal violence in the town of Yumbi. Since December, hundreds have been killed in ethnic violence in the region. The situation has led thousands to cross the Congo River in search for refuge in the Republic of Congo. During a press briefing on Wednesday, the UN mission said that the violence was purely ethnic and that government security forces were not involved.
As far as Yumbi is concerned, we wanted everyone to be informed, because what happened was serious. They were not attacks between government forces and a population or between armed groups. It is really a conflict between communities, and it has been deadly.
Malaysia has installed a new king, Sultan Abdullah Sultan Ahmad Shah, on Thursday after the last monarch abdicated. No official reason was given as to why Sultan Mohammed V abandoned the monarchical authority, but it was the first time a king had stepped aside before the end of his term. Malaysia is a constitutional monarchy where the national throne changes hands every 5 years. Press TV journalist Marcia Hashemi was greeted by cheering crowds as she finally arrived at Tehran's international airport on Wednesday. Hashemi was jailed for 10 days at a federal prison in Washington. The 59-year-old journalist was arrested at a U.S. airport on January 13. She was held as a material witness in an undisclosed case.
This issue that happened is a sign showing how important the Islamic Republic is and how much the U.S. are afraid of the 40-year revolution.
My mom, she was freed a few days ago. The reason she was arrested, they were basically bothering her because of her being an Iranian reporter working for the Islamic Republic, but because of the support of the media, social media, and the Iranian people, thank God that it helped the situation and to make the process go a lot faster for my mom.
In the United States, polar air has brought dangerously low temperatures to the Midwest. The Arctic weather has been blamed for causing at least 12 deaths in the region since Saturday. The bitter air is being carried by the polar vortex. That's a stream of air that spins around the North Pole but pushes south because its current has been disrupted. Climate experts expect these cold snaps to become more severe and more frequent due to global warming. And as temperatures hit a record low, an eerie stream rose over the surface of Lake Michigan. This video was taken from Chicago's shore on Wednesday morning. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories from our website at telesurenglish.net. And we're on social media as well, so go ahead and follow us. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.